So today we're going to be going over expense management. Okay, and I like to just start off by saying that expense management. I love this tool, but however, I've used other tools. Some of you might be familiar with Concur, or there might be some other reimbursement kind of software out there. And when I talk about this, I always just like to say, if you don't have anything in place, and if you're still using paper to do reimbursements, or even, oh my goodness, trying to find the receipts from people's credit cards when they use their credit cards, all of these things are things that I think in Financial Edge make it really easy. Now, if you have had something in the past, most of the programs that are out there that are specific to expense management and credit card processing, all of those are probably going to be more robust than what we see in Financial Edge. So I kind of like to say, again, for those of you who don't have anything, this is going to be a great program for you to get started with, because there are lots of cool tools in there that will give you that control that you need. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start here. So if you're familiar with Financial Edge, and if you don't have it in NXT, you should see something here called expenses. So for those of you who don't have the software or don't have the module, you might not see what I'm looking at right here. If you do and it's just not set up, that could be a different issue. But we can certainly help you kind of manage that as well, because it's not that complicated when you look at it from a 5,000 foot view. Okay. All right. So I'm going to just start off with going into manage expenses. And basically what this screen does, what we're looking at here, there's going to be some boxes here. You can notice here, there's a box called My Credit Card Transactions. And then you can see a box here from My Invoice Requests. You've got a box down here for Edit My Settings. And then for those of you who are going to be approvers, you'll have another box down here that will give you, it'll be an indication of when someone submits a charge, you will know, and it'll say, oh, pending charges, someone's requiring your approval. You can go ahead and see that. Okay, so and the credit card piece right here, this is the one that what I love, and this is the part that really would save me a lot of time, is if you have credit cards for your staff, this will be the area that people will see. Now, I don't have this connected to a credit card because they don't let me play with real money, but I did take a screenshot to show you what it would look like, but it's not going to be much different than what I'm going to show you right now in this My Invoice Requests. Okay. So the first thing is, before I even get into entering that, I'm going to go into the settings, because I'm going to show you some of the things that we can do here. So there's a concept of approval rules. And normally when we set up these approval rules, what I've seen most of the time is that people set them up based on departments. Because the idea is that there'll be people who are in departments and they will have their own budgets, and they will have a sort of like a supervisor that will approve or reject expenses. And so what we're looking at here, I have to just move this. Okay. I'm going to move this down here. Okay. And if you can see here that there's a couple of approval rules that we've already set up. And we named them, and I'm in a test environment here, so some of these things may not make as much sense. But what I like to look at is this one, for the first one that I see here, facilities reimbursement. And what this means here, just by looking at it from this perspective, is that this is the name of the rule is called facilities, which we'll see in a moment. And then there is where you see a from and to. This is the amounts. And so how this translates is that anything that is from 0 to 999.99 will go to this person called Tony Sue. Okay, so all expenses that were under $1,000 will just go to this person. If the expense is over $1,000, it'll go to Tony Sue first, and then it'll go to the next person, which would be Ann. Okay, and so we can have different kinds of levels. We can have multiple. It doesn't have to be just 2. It could be 5, 6, depending on the amounts that you're looking to track. I always just recommend that we keep it as simple as possible, so that we're not inundating people with emails. Because there is an opportunity later, which I'll show you, that whenever someone does require your approval, you can set up an email that will warn you or tell you that, hey, there's someone out there that's requiring your approval. Okay, so keep this in mind. These are the rules that we can do, that we can set up. We can set them up by the amounts. We also have a function that allows you to do self-approve. So if there's, if you're someone in the organization that, that doesn't really require, maybe you're the CEO and you want to submit these expenses, and we can do it. We can set up a self-approval. Or what I have seen is that sometimes things that are under $50, let's say, if you have a lot of those kinds of charges, maybe we can set up a self-approval limit for under $50 so that no one gets bothered by all of these transactions. Because if you think about it, if you have thousands of transactions, you're going to be sitting here all day approving and sending stuff through. So you want to manage that. Okay, so these are the approval rules, and we're going to see them in a moment somewhere else, but I just wanted to point them out so that you could see them and how we can create them. Okay, the next thing is this. Remember that this piece of the software that we're looking at here is really geared towards people who have credit cards, who are employees of the organization, and they're not necessarily accountants. And so they don't understand accounting. They don't understand, the GL coding, and we don't really want to share that information, right? Because it could be difficult for them. There's probably lots of opportunities to make mistakes. And so what Financial Edge NXT has is this opportunity to create what's called an expense category. So if you think about it, if you look at some of your credit card bills, you'll start to notice that there's a pattern of a few types of credit card expenses that come through, whether it's car rental, hotel, meals, mileage, office supplies. I don't know, there could be a list of, plenty others. And what we can do here is we create these expense categories, and notice here that there's a distribution, this is the account number that's going to be coded into, when someone chooses this amount. Okay, so for example, which I'll show you in a minute, if someone wants to get reimbursed for a car rental charge, they don't have to know that car rental is 5610. They can just choose car rental, and it'll be coded in the background, and they won't have to think about it. Okay, so it does make life a little bit easier for these people. Depending on your organization, depending on how large you are, we can talk about some different options. Like if you notice here that there are some asterisks here, and what that means is that, for example, if I was in a particular department, I might be 01, the last two digits, and maybe someone else might be 02, and we can default that information from my user perspective so that when the charge goes through, it gets coded properly with the full account number. Okay, and I'll just show you here. I'll just open this so that you can see it better. You can see the name here, the description. If there was a rate like a mileage reimbursement, you can click on this box. You can do that account code, or you can also just do the full account number. So you can do, I'll just start writing car rental. And of course, I'm not going to see it. Well, you can see here any types of these accounts that I'm looking at here. Notice that the account code is made up in this particular database of 3 segments. You may have more, you may have fewer, you'll have to have at least 2 of them. But the idea is that they'll show up here. And so if you didn't have that department setting, you could choose the full account number depending on your organization. And I would certainly help you with that, thinking about how you want to do that. Okay. Down here is also where if you do have, I'm going to need to move this here, depending on how your account structure is. Again, like you might have what are called transaction codes, where you'll see the grants. You might see, other things here. These are all customizable fields. So depending on your organization, you may not need them, or you may, but they might have different titles depending on what your needs are. Okay, and if you notice here that it says 100%, I just want to point out that you can also split things so that if there are some projects that you want to go, some of these percentages, you can do that and default that information from the beginning. Okay, all right, I'm going to cancel here. And then I'll just go through this, the user settings here. Each person will have their users, just like on your phone, how you want to be notified in terms of notifications, like on your phone. So you've got, this is your user information, but this is where it's important, for example, credit card notifications, or might be under invoice request notifications. How do you want to be notified? Do you want to be notified instantly, daily, weekly, or monthly? You can choose the frequency of how you want to be notified. Okay, so and what's nice about these particular area here is that you can choose to change it. If you've done it a certain way and you find that after 3 months it's not working for you and you want to change it so that you're not missing stuff, you can go ahead and do that.
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Please. Yes.
So when you default the GL account, if you go to that screen, can you default the credit account always, whatever the AP account is? Where do you
Very
go
good
that?
question. Yes, very good question. So in this case, for our concern purposes here, we're only worried about the debit account number because that's going to be the expense. We're going to default that, and I didn't show you that because that's in another part of the system. But you will default that, and typically what people will use for the credit card, they will use something that's called credit card payable. And then if it was an invoice request, it would be accounts payable. So depending on where you're using that, but very good question.
So where do we set that to default to, either of the two accounts that we want?
Oh, it's in the database view. It's in the database view, which I don't have opened right now, but there's a setting where you can put whichever accounts you want.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So yeah. And then I just want to point out here, there's an out of office. For those of you who are going to be approvers, I remember how I mentioned on the approval rule, if your name is on that approval rule and someone selects your approval rule, to approve something, if you're not there, obviously that item is going to get blocked, right? So if you go on vacation, take PTO or something like that, you can turn on this out of office feature. And what'll happen is you can say, okay, well, you know what? I want all my requests to go to this other person that's going to be covering for me so that, we don't bottleneck on all of these expenses. Okay. So this is something that's really cool. I think that's nice to do because it's not stopping anybody from doing their work. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and cancel here. And now I'm going to go into this manage expenses, and this is what people are going to see. Remember that this is the view, if you will, and we're going to go into invoice requests. So this feature here is going to be used for reimbursements. Now that's what it was designed for, but what I've seen typically happening, which I think is amazing, is that many organizations have different departments or they have different locations. And, sometimes the AP, the vendor invoices don't necessarily go to the accounting department directly. And so, in the past, you have to get that bill to them and, be paper trails and all of that. But with here, what I like about this feature is that it's not just for reimbursements. If there's another department or another location that gets invoices that need to be entered, they can use this feature. And what's nice about it is that, for example, so they'll come in here and, again, whether it's a reimbursement or they're entering an invoice, they can click on this new invoice request. They will see an opportunity here that says, search for the vendor. So as soon as you start typing the name of a vendor, it'll start popping up, whichever one that you want. You can select it. You can put part of the name. I also just want to mention here, and I just noticed that just as I selected one of the vendors, if there was a previous invoice that you're trying to copy because you're doing this every month or something like that, and you want to take the same information that you had on that previous invoice, you could potentially just click on one of these or search for it, copy it so that it copies all that information into this page right here. Okay. Otherwise, you could just fill this out. And I will also mention that this is a vendor, this is your vendor records that are in Financial Edge. So if someone is not an approved vendor already, they won't be able to use this piece of this feature. And what I've been working with other clients is to come up with a procedure. Like, for example, so if it is a new vendor, they're not going to be able to add it. but what they will do is come up with another procedure. And what's that procedure? And it could be different for every organization. You can decide that, okay, if the vendor does not exist, maybe choose another vendor here, like a non-existing vendor, something that will let you finish the screen, but you can put the information about this vendor in this box that we see right here where it says expense detail or purpose, because this is a free box of information that you can give to anybody that's looking at these invoices after you. Okay, so this will be and then if you do have that procedure in terms of creating a new vendor, you're going to want to collect the W-9, all that stuff. But that's part of what I want you to think about as you implement something like this, because if you haven't done it before, then we need to think about those scenarios that will come up. Okay, so we're going to just assume right now that it was office supplies that I bought. You've got an invoice number, you've got an invoice date, you've got the description of what I bought. Here's where the approval rule defaulted to self-approve. It did that for me specifically because I'm logged in as a supervisor. But if you weren't a supervisor, you wouldn't even see this. And what you would see, let me just put something in here. What you would see here is all those rules that we just saw a few moments ago. Okay, and we can default the ones that is, so like if I was always involved, in other words, if I was in the facilities department, I can just default this from that user settings that we just looked at a moment ago, so that I don't even have to choose this. And it's one less click if you default some of the stuff that you can. But I would choose the rule that I want to go through. I'm going to just leave it self-approve. And then, I could put in more information here in terms of the expenses, the detail, all that information. And
can I ask a question? I'm sorry. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How can we prevent self-approval rule like at company level instead of like vendor level?
Then we would do it through security module. So there's a very robust security module within Financial Edge that you can limit that. Honestly, the only people that have self-approve are supervisors, and there should only be one person who has supervisor rights. No one else will have that feature, unless remember how I said earlier that there was a feature where we can do self-approve under $50, let's say, or whatever amount that we choose. Then if the amount of the invoice was under that amount, then we'd have that option available, for only because those charges are under that certain amount, that threshold.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so the next thing down here is the expense category. So I can go ahead and now click on this. And this is what we saw earlier, right? The car rental, all of these things, these are things that they're going to choose. And you can, again, I've had some organizations that have hundreds of these categories, depending on what people buy with their credit card. But you can have them all, or you can have some of them. They do have to be created once you get started. And we want to make it easier. I've had some organizations where they only use like one of them. And then because they're so small and people do know the account numbers, they can go ahead and just select have one in there and watch what happens here. I'll go ahead and click on this. Just a car rental. And then if I put the amount in of the invoice, let's say $150, and then I can click on distribution hidden, I can unhide it here. And so now the account number, if I wanted to change it, I can go ahead and change it. Now, it didn't default in here for me because I don't have my settings set up correctly, but let's just say I'll do supplies because I know I have that account. Okay, supplies. Notice now it filled in the account number. And this, again, this is something that I would ask you about. How do we want to default this as much as possible? I mean, obviously, if you are using the project segment in Financial Edge, and maybe, me specifically from submitting this request, I work with many projects. And so I would need to tell you that, hey, there's a project here, I'm working on this one. So you can go ahead and choose which project it is, whether it's, arts or, camp for kids or a scholarship or an endowment. All of those things are things I can choose. And we can give access to those people, or we can also just take this away so that they don't even have to choose this part and then have someone else in the approval process put the account number in there for them. So depending on how your organization is set up and the culture of it, it depends on how we're going to move forward with this and how we set it up, because there is some flexibility in the business rules of how we move forward in getting that done. Okay, so I'm going to continue just, scrolling down. I can also add additional expense categories. So if I did have an invoice that I wanted to do and then it had office supplies and it had something else in there, I can make multiple ones. I can also split it. Notice that there's a split button here. If I want to split it between projects, I can do that, or I can split it here by account number. Again, it depends on your organization. You have that flexibility to do that. And then scrolling down here, I've got custom fields. For those of you who are familiar with Financial Edge 7, the database view, this is just renamed attributes. So if you have attributes, they were just renamed in NXT as custom fields. And again, I can discuss those with you, because what that does is that allows you to record additional information about this charge. And I've seen the gamut. I've seen people use this for other features, like if you wanted to track if this was a minority-based vendor and you want to make sure that that gets tagged, you can do that. You can create an attribute or a custom field that will record that information. Okay. And then finally down here, you've got the opportunity to drag a file here or click to browse. I can drag a file in here. And so I've actually tested this myself, and it does work. You can log into FE NXT through your phone, and if you have access to this expense management module, you can do this on your phone. So for those people who are program directors and they're traveling quite a bit, they can do this on their phone. They can take a picture of the receipt, and then they'll be able to attach it into this area here, and it'll drag into just in an area where you can put in all the information. If you save the receipts, and of course if you were on your phone, you would see all the receipts that you've just taken a photo of. Okay, so all that information is here to available for the next person to see. And then at the bottom down here, you can go ahead and either save the draft and continue it later, or you can submit it. And as soon as you hit submit, it will go to those people that are affiliated with that approval rule. Okay, any questions on that? I do see some chat. All right, I'm gonna hold off on the chat for now, but or if you do have a question, unmute yourself and ask me.
Oh, right. I have a question.
Hi, Karen. Yep.
Hi, I put this in the chat, but I've got attributes set up for web purchasing. And so we're running all of our, just for the approval piece of it, we're running everything through web purchasing, but I really would like to get those things that don't need purchase orders set up through expense management. But anyway, I've got the attributes set up for web purchasing, but I've never been quite sure how the custom fields. I've just never done much with custom fields. So are those the same thing? They
are the same thing. They were just renamed. They are the same things. Yep, just renamed.
So if I have attributes set up already for web purchasing, would those be available in expense management? Okay.
Yes, they will. Because remember that there's a whole bunch of different attributes. There are what's called transaction attributes. There is a record attribute. There are just many types of attributes. So depending on what it is, invoice attributes, client attributes. So depending on what it is that you're looking for, because there's so many of them, I want to make sure that that you are using the right one that's going to translate where you need it. Like, an invoice attribute is only available when you're doing invoices. A transaction attribute is available when you're doing journal entries. So there are different kinds, and it just depends on how you're using it that would determine, when and where you see it. But all of those should be there at the same place.
Okay, thank you.
All right, cool.
I have a question.
Please, yes.
So we here at the Norton Museum of Art really want to go paperless with our accounts payable process. So we're really interested in using this not only for credit card and reimbursement, for also all accounts payable. And it seems a little cumbersome that a department, anyone in any particular department can't create a vendor, because we pay a lot of speakers and performers on a weekly basis. And I guess my question is, is there a way to set this up where where the person who's requesting this expense could enter the vendor themselves? Because again, we have a lot of new vendors on a week-to-week basis.
I believe, and maybe it's not here. I don't know what. You know what? It might not just be there. Let me look here. Hang on 1 second. Vendor. I was going to say, I thought I saw something that I'm thinking maybe just got confused. If I were to, it might be something that's coming in beta, because I might have seen it on a database. So what I've seen, and now I don't see it anymore. And I was going to say that it's probably because of security rights. But when you do a new invoice request, what I have seen here, right here, if you see my cursor kind of blinking here, enter vendor, there was a button that said, add, but I thought it was only for people who have security rights, because you wouldn't want just anybody adding them unless you give them security rights. And I don't know now offhand, I don't remember where I saw it, but I thought like, wow, that's really cool. But the fact that I don't see it now and I am a supervisor makes me think that maybe I saw it in beta, something that's coming in. But you could potentially, do that through security, so that you limit the person what they're doing, and it would just mean that they would have to take an extra step, so that if they did search for a vendor and it didn't appear here, all they'd have to do is just X out of here, go to payables, go to vendors, add that vendor, and then come back in here and it'll be added.
Okay.
So it's an extra step to move away from there, but like I said, I feel like I saw that button, and so and I got excited because I thought that was really cool. But I don't see it now, so something's up.
And we could give that person just that one right to add a vendor if we chose.
Correct, exactly, and nothing else. Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. So now I just showed you this piece right here, right? I'm hitting my backspace. That this is, that screen that we just looked at that we completed. What I want to show you next is if you had a credit card. Now this area right here is going to look similar to what we're seeing here in the invoice request. And if there were some charges, we would see some numbers here. And what happens is that we can connect all the credit cards to the credit card company, and each person has access to their, what I would call their feed, right? Their credit card feed. And what it looks like is that it looks exactly like this new invoice request. And I took a screenshot so that, can you all see this too? Am I still sharing that? Okay, so if you notice that I just took a screenshot from someone who does have it, and basically you'll notice here, right, that on the right hand side, it's that same box that we just filled in for the new invoice requests. But what's different is that there's this column here on the left hand side, which is the feed. Okay, and so once you select the person that you are, like, well, first of all, if you're already logged in, it'll know who you are. You can hit this button up here on the upper right hand corner that says refresh, and it'll feed all of the information into this area here. And then each person will have to go in there, and again, you could do this on their phone. They would select the charge that they have, like this one right now is grade, which is this Amazon one, and you'd be able to fill in the vendor, the description, the post date, and the account number. Again, there's also, you can fill that information, and you can choose, I didn't go low enough with my screenshot, but you could use the expense category. All of those things are things that they would fill out exactly like we just saw in that other one. And so they'll go in here and they'll see all their charges. They'll fill out this information. What we would talk about here is this is a great way to track vendor information. But remember, people use credit cards for gas and, small things. And we can question whether or not we want to add that vendor. Oh, by the way, here's that plus sign. Okay, I did see it somewhere. Okay, it just wasn't where I thought it was. Okay, and so you could choose a vendor, but I always ask people when I'm working with them on this is say, like, if someone's buying gas, like, do we really need to have a vendor set up for that gas station? Because you'd have so many vendors after a while. So in those cases, we would come up with a procedure and say, okay, well, if the charge is a certain amount, we don't really care that, you bought this food, at this vendor. So we might create, we might just use the credit card company as the vendor in that case, so that we're not because we don't really care about the vendor information for those small charges or for those things that just aren't, I don't know, I guess appropriate. It's not something you want to track, but certainly, if you're using the credit card to track most expenses, then you do want it at the vendor level. So you can always go into the vendor level and see, hey, man, this is how much I've spent in with this vendor. And, whether I use a credit card or I paid by check or by draft or by EFT, all those things, I can see all of them in one place. Versus like in the past, if you have credit cards and you're not using this feature, you don't ever know how much money you spent at Delta Airlines or at A+ Office Supplies unless you go and look at all the invoices and add them up manually. Or maybe the credit card company might be able to give you access to their portal. I don't know what their reporting's like. Each credit card company is different, but this is definitely a better way to handle that and track all that information. Okay. All right, I'm going to just minimize this and come back to here. So that's the credit card feed. Once they submit the credit card, it looks exactly the same as here, where they'll be able to choose the approval rule, and on the bottom they'll be able to hit submit here on the upper the lower left-hand area. Once it's submitted, it goes to that level, right? So if it was under 100 in that example that I gave you, it would only go to Tony. But if it was over 1,000, it would go to Tony first, and then it would go to Ann. That's how that's how we've set up that particular rule that we've chosen. And after the first person approves it, in this case, if Tony saw it first and he approved it, then it would go to Ann. If Tony rejected it, it would go back to me because I was the one who submitted it, and give me an opportunity to redo it if there was some, if I rejected it. You can also put in a reason as to why it was rejected, and give people an opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe they didn't submit the right documents to support their the information or something like that. All of those things are things that are part of the process, if you will. Okay. And then at the end of the day, when all those things are done, it makes it a little bit easier, because I know for my own experience, collecting receipts sometimes is a difficult thing to do. As the accounts payable person or someone in the finance department, what's nice is that there is a feature here under Treasury called credit cards. And once they're connected, I'm not going to see anything here, but no matter who the credit card, okay, I have some credit cards set up in here, but I don't know any data. But the idea is that once these things are connected, regardless if the person who used the credit card refreshed their feed, if you will, and submitted them, you can always come in here and see what's out there. And I think that was really helpful. That would be really helpful for me. I remember when I was doing lots of grant reporting, some people get these charges, a month and, 2 months later, and, not know where it was booked, and only to find out that it was a grant that was a month, that ended a month earlier. So there is a mechanism that I like to kind of point out and train people on to look at that, so that you're not missing anything, so that if someone forgets to submit their requests, you can go ahead and stay on top of it and know about it, without having to do anything, by just logging into the financial ledge as part of your workday and say, okay, well, I've got this information here. This person hasn't done that. You can either make a call or you can just go ahead and submit it yourself, depending on, how your organization is structured. Okay. You can also, when we set up the feeds, we also have what's called delegates, so that again, the people that are obviously going to be choosing the credit cards, they have access to the system, but you as a delegate can also be part of that, so that you can see all of their charges as they come in, and you can see everyone's. And generally, what I like to do is give people in the accounting department, that access to that information, so that they can manage it as well, because as or at least that was my experience, sometimes directors lose receipts or forget about them and all that stuff, and that's critical for your organization not to do, right? All right, let me see. I'm going to make sure I covered everything. I'm going to open it up to questions now. Yeah. All right. So I've done everything that I want to do. So let's, I can open the chat, or go ahead and unmute yourself, and please ask me some questions, and we'll go from there.
So Sal, how does licensing work for expense management? Would all the staff need a license if they're going to do their credit card reporting?
They will. Okay, so don't quote me on this, but a couple of years ago, they used to. So there are three types of licenses. There's a full user license, which would be people in this room, where people who are the accountants, if you will, the users of the financial edge. Then there are what's called view-only licenses, which are people that go in and only view reports, and you can limit what they see. And those licenses, they used to come like in 10 packs. And then there was another one that was called expense management users. And again, they were sold in 10 packs as far, a year or so ago. I think Blackbaud has changed it and has made it unlimited now. So, and they're all concurrent. So if there were 10 and you had 30 people, that might still be enough, because not everyone's going to be logged in at the same time. Everybody can share those licenses, so it's not an issue. And if you feel like you need more because it is growing and you're using it for the AP purposes, then you might need more.
Okay.
But that's the answer.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Hi, Sal, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Evelyn.
Morning, how you doing?
I'm well.
Okay, so I have a question. We have implemented our region's credit card connected to the Blackbaud NXT software, but we are now in the next stage where we need to implement end users to connect to the software to upload their detail. Where can you point out again, because it seemed like I'm missing a feature on my end as I'm looking at your screen that will allow me to add the end users for the credit cards to upload their credit card receipts. Where is that section again?
Yeah, so just to kind of make sure that I answer all of the questions, because there's a couple of places. The first thing is that if you're familiar with Financial Edge, the database view, I don't have it open right now, but you do need to create a user profile for those people. And so they're going to have, just like you have a user profile that's controlled by the group and security, you will have that available to do. You need to do that for each credit card holder. So that's the first step. And then within that user profile, you can control, when I mentioned earlier about whether or not they're self-approval or they're an approver, you would guide that. Or even better, which a lot of people have been using now, is like if you're using the project segment or even the account segments, if let's say you don't want people to, or you only want people to view their own projects, like in a view-only perspective, and you can limit what they see. So there's that piece first, and then the second piece is you're going to go into Treasury and you go into credit cards, and this is something you should have, whether you have the expense management module or not. And right here, this is where you would add that credit card. And and you can see here that this is linked. I'm just curious what would happen if I go edit, because oh, okay. All right. So this is good. I'm surprised that I even got this far. So what this is that this is where I was mentioning earlier about. So let's say this person, Amber Hodge, she's a credit card holder. This is her ID. And so what I would do here now is, this is the delegate. So I would go ahead and let me just see if I can find somebody. let's see if she's in there. Yep. So she's in there. And then I might put myself. Am I in there? Yes, I am. And so now these are all the delegates. So obviously the person who is the credit card holder has to be part of this delegate. And then the additional people will be the people like, the accountants, because we want to be able to make sure that we see all those charges as well.
Got you. So I need to, of course, create the profile for the individuals, add them as a delegate into section for their specific credit card, and the approver needs to be added on here. So not just the end user, but the approver, correct?
Not the approver doesn't have to be part of this piece right here.
Oh.
The approver needs to be, but if they're, if they have their own credit card, but no, so with this, all we need is the card holder and the accountants. The approver really is only important in the approval rule. And that's what we saw earlier, and I can show you that in a minute. But this is where the delegate is, where of who can see what. In fact, if I go ahead and say save now, I'm just curious if I go back here now into manage expenses, if it allows me to choose. Oh yeah, maybe. Filter. Oh, no, it's not. Okay. What I'm not seeing here, because I don't see it connected, is that, like, when you see how it says MasterCard 2334, there would be another link in here that makes me switch it. And I can say, and I can see, and if I was a delegate to many of these people, I can say, oh, I want to look at Amber's, or I want to look at Sal's, or I want to look at someone else's. I would see a list here. And right now I don't see that because I just don't think we're connected somehow.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Anybody else? All right. Well, I'll give everybody.
You know what? I'm sorry. I have one more question. Sorry.
Sure.
Sorry.
It's okay.
So for the credit cards, when the individuals are uploading the credit card, it will allow us to view each transaction each receipt that is tied to each credit card transaction. So if my grant accountant is now looking for a specific charge, he or she will be able to view the receipt that is tied to that specific charge.
That's exactly right. And this is where I am now. I'm on the invoice request screen, but it would look the same for the credit card. Here would be a list of all the charges. And then this is a running charge, and you can filter out what you want. You want to see this, the approved or anything else. This would be the list. And I would see that this one's been approved, and I could see all the information about it. And if I scroll down here, I can see here, look, this is my authorization form. I can see that it's a PDF. I can click on this, and it's looked like it's opening up another tab here. And now I've got that information.
And for end users, when they're entering the data, as in, this is an Office Depot charge, this is what site or location or project the expenses for, this is information they can select. So my accounts payable clerk is not having to do that overburden of that entry. But can they also include description, or my accounts payable clerk have to handle the description part?
Nope, they can see all of that. Remember here, like, this is the screen that it looks like. So they'll see the description, they'll see the vendor. Okay. Now there's additional information here. They'll see everything that the person inputted, including the file that's attached to it. And just so that you know, that person, the accounts payable person, I always recommend that someone always looks at it. I mean, someone needs to see it in the accounting department. Like, we're not going to get away from that. But you're right, that person will not have to key them in, but that person will have that final, like, approval, in the sense of not so much an approval, but at least making sure that the account number is correct. And that's what I always want to make sure, that we put some of these things in place so that we can capture that and make sure that that's happening.
Okay. No, this is helpful.
Yep. Okay. And I also recommend, and for those of you, in this case, Evelyn, if you're about to do this, what I would recommend is that you, when you roll it out just for one department first. Keep doing what you're doing with everybody else. Roll it out with one department. Just put one credit card in there or something like that, and test it out. Like with, because it's just easier for you to do it with one department. Let them come back to you with what they like, what they don't like, what we can change, and things like that, before rolling it out to everybody, where you can get inundated with calls and they're not going to know what to do. And it's easy enough to just create like a little video of saying, this is what you need to do a little Zoom video and show them how to do it so that they can play it, because it's not that difficult. But having that and testing it out for your organization, because if you have something already in place, I'll tell you right now, people are going to be unhappy. People are always unhappy with change. If they don't have to submit things for approval, and now you're forcing them to submit things for approval, I guarantee you they will be unhappy. So let's roll it out a little bit easier, and everybody will be happy, because this is definitely the way to go to ease the burden on the AP department.
Yeah, we have 30 to 35 end users that we need to input this data for. So,
right.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Cool.
I had another question.
Please. Yes. Hi, Karen.
Hi. So in the web purchasing portal, myself and my assistant that does all of the coding on requisitions that come through, we can go in and see if something is sitting on somebody's basically, desk. Because we can see all of the requisitions that have been submitted. My understanding is that we would not be able to do that with expense management. Is that correct? I know on the credit card, you said if we were set up as delegates, we could do that. But
Right.
would we be able to see something that somebody created, or, what stage something's at in the approval process?
If you're involved in it, in other words, if you were part of the approver, you would be able to see it. But I know what you're talking about. There is in the security module, there is something that there's a box that says you can view all requests or all requisitions, and that box does exist. And it looks like, I know that it works for web purchasing, but web purchasing isn't part of this.
Right.
And so Blackbaud is working on getting that fixed. I don't know when or how, or, but you're right. You can't see things that are only in this invoice request. With the credit cards, you can always see it because you have access to this treasury. But on the invoice request, if someone's submitting something and you just wanted to know, but you're not part of the approval process, you won't be able to see it until it hits either, accounts payable or through the approval process.
Okay, but if we're part of the approval, because actually the rules that we set up send everything through her and through me for coding and final approval. So we should still be able to see all of it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And that's the way around it. That's what I would do. I generally like to put like someone in the accounting department, accounts payable, as part of the final approval, or maybe the first approver, depending on how the organization works and coding, how difficult that is. But so like, for example, if you put it in the beginning, then we know that charge is going to be correct going forward throughout the approval process. But we can also put that person in the end, and just so that they know, oh, look, where I've got all these requests that are coming through. By the time I got them, if I was that last person, I know for sure that everything's already been approved. And so all I have to do is just verify the numbers and we're good to go.
Yeah, and our coding is complicated enough that we don't want our program staff doing it.
I get it.
We always put ourselves at the end.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, listen, thank you. I'll go through the chat as well. So if there's some questions, I'll answer them via email if we didn't get to it today. This was, a special one that I wanted to do. If those of you who aren't aware, I also do a series starting in the fall. So mid-September, there'll be what I call Mornings with Sal, and we'll do these kinds of sessions. I like them to be more interactive, kind of like what we're doing now, where people ask me questions. But if people don't ask questions, then I just go ahead and choose a topic and go over that. But look for an email from me to register for those. It'll be every 2 weeks, and I'll do it for about 8 weeks, starting September, the middle of September. And if you have questions, please email them to me in advance. And, and if it's not on a topic, I will make sure that it gets on a topic.